Welcome to this WiseOwl Report Builder tutorial. In this video we'll explain how to create drill-through reports using maps. We'll start by creating the target report, including the hidden parameter that we'll pass our country ID values into. Then explain how to create the parent report, including a map. We'll show you how you can find map shapefiles and load those into the report, how you can link your dataset to the map data, and then visualize some data on the map. The final part involves assigning the drill-through action to the map so that clicking on a country will show all the films made in that country. So let's get started. Here's the basic example that we'll aim to create. This report contains a map with different countries of the world shaded in different shades of green, and the idea is that the darker the shade of green, the longer the average runtime of films made in that country. So you can see over here New Zealand's quite a dark shade of green, and if I hover the mouse over New Zealand it says in a tooltip New Zealand 168.88, that's the average runtime of films made in New Zealand. Not only can I see the information in a tooltip, I can drill through by clicking on the country into a different report which lists out all the films made in the country I've just clicked on. So there we can understand why the average runtime of New Zealand films is so long, apparently because Peter Jackson doesn't know how to make a short film. So we can then click back on the Back to Parent Reports button. We could pick a different country. Let's pick Italy, for example. Click on Italy and we'll get the same report but filtered this time for Italian films, or at least films made in Italy. So it's a fairly intuitive, simple system for your end users to work with, and that's what we'll aim to create in this video. If you would like to follow along, then you'll need a copy of the WiseOwl Movies database, and as always you can use this video to help you get that set up if you haven't already done so, and there's a link in that video's description you can use to download the file you'll need. Assuming you've done that part already, I've got a brand new blank report waiting for me in Report Builder, and the first thing we'll do in here is create the target report to show the list of films made in any given country. I'll begin by creating a data source to connect to the WiseOwl Movies database, so I can right-click Data Sources and choose Add Data Source. I'll change its name to call it Movies, use an embedded connection pointing to a Microsoft SQL server, and then click the Build button to get some help with the connection string. I can type in a shortcut to my local host, // and then the name of the instance of SQL Server I'm using, SQL 2017. From the drop-down list down at the bottom there, I can select my Movies database and then click OK a couple of times to create my Movies data source. Next, I can create my data set. I can right-click on Movies and choose Add Dataset. I'll call this one Films. If I can spell films, that was a terrible attempt, apologies, films. And then if I click the Query Designer button, I can simply select a few columns from the film table that I'd like to display in the table in this report. So let's go with title and release date and runtime minutes. I can then click OK a couple of times. And then I can add a basic table to display these results. I'll tidy up a little first by removing the page footer, get rid of the title text box, and then right-click into the body of the report and choose to insert a table. I'll add the three columns I've selected, so title, release date, and runtime minutes. Just to avoid the font rendering bug, I'll highlight all the cells in the table and then switch from the default font to any other, and then back to the default font. You'll have encountered that before if you've watched any of the previous videos in this series. Then I'll change the width of the title column so I can read things a little more clearly. I'll format the release date as a date quickly, and then I'll change some basic formatting properties of the header row, and then give the report a quick run just to check that it looks sensible. And there's the basic output table that we'll use. Next, I need to be able to filter this report to show only the films made in a particular country. To do that, we're going to add a parameter to the report, and as always we've got a couple of choices to create our parameter. We could create a report parameter first and then assign a filter to the dataset or to the table, or we could create a query parameter by modifying the SQL query, which will create the report parameters for us automatically. I'm going to create a query parameter by right-clicking on the film's dataset and choosing Dataset Properties. And then in the select statement, right down at the very bottom after the from clause, I'm going to add a where clause to say where film.countryid equals, and then I simply need to make up a parameter name, which I'll call @countryid. Now that I've done that, I can click OK, and you'll see that the corresponding report parameter gets created for me automatically. There's one basic property here that I'll change first. I'm going to double click on the country ID parameter, and the data type of the report parameter has been set to text. Now the data type of the country ID column in the underlying database is an integer. It doesn't technically need to be changed here. It will still work if I enter the value of the country ID as text, but I always think it's best practice to match the data type of the report parameter to the data type of the column that the value will be compared with. So I'm going to change this to an integer and then click OK. And then I can give the report a quick test. If I run this, I happen to know the numbers of some of the country IDs in my database. If I type in 48 and hit enter, that's China. If I type in 240, that's the United Kingdom. 241 is the United States. So that seems to be responding well to the values I'm typing in. I think that part's working quite nicely. I'd like to make one final change to this parameter to make it a hidden parameter, so that if we just open this report up by itself, we don't get the opportunity to enter a value. The only way we should be able to pass a value into this report is by clicking on something in our parent report. So to make that happen, I'm going to go back to the design view. I'll double click on the country ID parameter and set its visibility parameter, or visibility property I should say, to hidden. I've mentioned in previous videos the internal option there. That's for hidden parameters which can't be changed by anything from outside of this report. So internal parameters can't have values passed into them from another report, so that makes them fairly useless for what we're trying to do here. So I'll leave that set as hidden. Now that does mean that if I click OK and run the report, I won't subsequently be able to see anything because the country ID parameter doesn't have a value. If you wanted to be able to run this as a developer just to check that your different format changes have had an effect, what you might consider doing is assigning a default value to that parameter. So I could say, for example, go to the country ID parameter, hit default values, specify values, and then add a known country ID. So if I go for 48, which was the ID for China, and then click OK, when I run the report this time it will show the Chinese films, or the films made in China, and then I can still test my report even though I can't physically change the value of that parameter. All I need to do now in order to make this work when I click on a country in the parent report that we'll create is save this to my report server. So I'm going to head back to the design view. I'll hit the save button. I'll make sure that I'm pointing at my recent sites and servers and choose my the one that I was using to demonstrate the sample report at the beginning of the video. I've got a drill through reports folder set up in there, so I'll go into there and I'll call this one, let's call it country target report. So that should be easy enough to spot in the list. Once I've saved it, that's the basic target report set up and ready to go. Now let's create the report that will contain the map. To do that, I'll head to the File menu and choose New, and then select Blank Report from the dialog box that appears. And then a little bit of repetition here. I need to right-click on the Data Sources folder and choose Add Data Source. I'll call it Movies. Use an embedded connection, choose Microsoft SQL Server, build the connection string ./SQL 2017 and select the movies database from the drop-down list. Click OK a couple of times and that's the data source created. Then I'll right-click on Movies and choose Add Dataset. And at this point I'll call the dataset Country Films. And then I'll click the Query Designer to get a bit of help selecting the fields I'll need. So from the tables folder, I'm going to go to the country table first, and I'm going to select the country ID and the country fields from there. The country ID is the value that I'm going to pass into my target report, whereas the country field I'll need to link it to the map data that I'll show you shortly. Finally, we need something from the film table that we can make use of to aggregate. So we could include the film ID to count it, the runtime minutes to find the sum or the average or the min or the max, etc. We can choose as many of these fields as we think we might need. Just for this simple example, I'm going to stick with the runtime minutes example I was showing you at the beginning of the video. So I'll check the runtime minutes box and then click OK and OK again, and that's the basic data set created. Next, I need to create the map, and just before I do that, I'm going to give myself a little bit more space to work with the map. So I'm going to head to the View tab in the ribbon, and I'm going to uncheck the Grouping and Parameters panels. I'm also going to get rid of my page footer by right-clicking and choosing to remove it, and then getting rid of the title text box at the top as well. I can then right-click into the report body and choose Insert Map. And when I do that, it automatically inserts a map that's got what's referred to as a Bing Maps layer. If I click on the map to bring up the Map Layers panel, I'll see that I've got a Bing Maps tile layer, which is linked to Microsoft Bing Maps. You can do some basic things with that. You can sort of rearrange it as you might expect to in Bing Maps. If anybody actually uses Bing Maps, I've got no idea. But you can click and drag to pan around. You can roll the mouse wheel forwards and backwards to zoom in and out. And you'll see it does respond basically like Bing Maps does on the web. Now, Bing Maps is all well and good, but that's not particularly useful when we want to display data from our dataset. So in order to make that work, what we need to do is create a new layer. To do that, there's a little layer wizard button at the top of the Map Layers panel. And if I click on that, it launches a wizard that allows me to build up my own custom map layer to present some data. The first step of the wizard asks you to choose where your geographic or spatial data comes from, and this is where you're at a bit of an advantage if you're trying to map geography in the United States, because you can probably tell already from the default map gallery there's a bunch of pre-built-in USA maps, and you can simply click on these to see what sort of information you get. There's even a separate folder for the individual states separated by county. So, pretty cool if you want USA mappings, but of course our films come from countries across the world, so we can't use that option in this case. We could also write a SQL Server query to return spatial data from a SQL Server database. SQL Server has a special geography data type which allows you to store spatial data. Now, I don't have any of that available, so that option's not useful for me either. What we're going to do is probably the simplest option: use an ESRI shapefile. It's the simplest option, providing you can find a shapefile that meets your needs. There's a little link there to give you some hints about where you can find these ESRI shapefiles, but the simplest thing you could probably do is have a quick Google search for ESRI shapefile world map, and there are loads and loads of hits, and feel free to have a browse through these a little later on. The specific map I'm going to use for this video, just so that you can follow along if you wanted to with what I'm doing, is on the naturalearthdata.com website. Free vector and raster map data, and the specific map I'm using is in this section here, admin 0 countries, and I've clicked the download countries link there. The file that I've downloaded, I've also unzipped that file, and if I can just show you very quickly what that looks like. It's on my desktop in that folder there. So the important file here is the SHP file. That's the one that contains the outlines of the countries of the world. There are lots of other files in here that are important as well, so don't delete those just because you think you don't need them. You definitely do, and I'll explain why soon. So I'm going to, back in Report Builder, choose to use an ESRI shapefile, hit the Browse button, head to my desktop, open up that folder, and then select that shape file, and I'll get a little representation of what that map looks like at this point, and then I can click the Next button to set up some of the basic properties of that map. So this is where I can do the panning and zooming. I can do all of this later on anyway, so it's not vital to do this right now. I get a little warning you might have spotted as well about Bing Maps at this point. I can't do anything to solve this problem right now, but if I just hover the mouse over the red circle there, it says the Bing Maps layer can't be displayed because the coordinate system of the viewport is set to planar. That makes a whole lot of sense, doesn't it? I suppose if you're a GIS person, that makes all the sense in the world. Haha, pun intended. I can't do anything to fix this at the moment. Basically, the way that this particular shapefile is displayed by default isn't compatible with the way Bing Maps is displayed, but we'll fix that once we've finished the wizard. Let's click Next to move to the next stage of the wizard, and at this point I need to choose how the data is going to be visualized. The basic map doesn't actually visualize any data from your dataset, it just draws the outline of the map, so that's not particularly useful at this point. Color Analytical was the example I showed you at the start of the video, where you get different regions of the world coloured in different colours. And then Bubble Map allows you to do that same thing as the Color Analytical map, but with the addition of a bubble on top of each region, where the size of the bubble represents the size of the column you're comparing it against. For this example, I'll go with Color Analytical and then click Next. Then I have to choose which data set from Report Builder I'm trying to link my map to. That's nice and easy. I've only got one data set available, so I'll select it and then click Next. And then the most important part of the wizard, how you connect the data in your Report Builder dataset, which is shown down here in this bottom table, with the data contained in the map shapefile, which is shown here in the middle table. Now the data that's being displayed here in this spatial data table comes from one of those additional files that we unzipped after downloading the file from the website. The specific file is this one here, the admincountries.dbf, and you can see that that's stored as an OpenOffice spreadsheet file. If you happen to have OpenOffice or even LibreOffice installed on your computer, you can right-click on that file, choose Open With, choose either the LibreOffice Calc or the OpenOffice spreadsheet program, and then choose to open it, and you can see once you've chosen which character set you want to use, I'll just accept the default there, you can hopefully see you've basically got a gigantic spreadsheet listing out all of the data that that shapefile is linked to. So each row in this table represents a different country which will be drawn in the shapefile. So we can link the shapes themselves to rows of data in this mini database. I'm not going to make any changes to that. I thought it was just interesting to show you how this actually all works. I'm just going to close down OpenOffice and get back to my map layer wizard. Obviously the column I'm going to compare in my Report Builder dataset, my movies data, is the country column. I just have to now find a column that contains matching information, and I have several candidates for that, but I need to be slightly careful. There's a row there that shows the United States of America. If I just have a look at my Report Builder dataset, if I scroll down to see the United States, I've been a little tiny bit lazy when I entered my data. I didn't type in the United States of America, I just typed in United States. So if I try to map the country column with the sovereignty column, that won't find a match for United States of America. So I need to find another candidate that I can link these columns to. So if I scroll along, I've got, let's see, I've got an admin column, but again that says United States of America. I've got a geo unit, that's United States of America. If I keep on going, eventually I've got an option there, the subunit, that says United States. A little further along, I've got name long, that says United States as well. I'm not sure why name long is shorter than name when it's for the United States of America, but I think I'm going to go with that one, name long. So now that I've found that, I'm going to scroll down through the list at the top of the dialog box, find the name long column and tick the box next to it, and then I can select my country field from my movies database to create the match or the join, if you want to think of it in those terms, and that's how I link my data to the map. Okay, let's get on to the next stage by clicking the next button. Now we get to choose how we visualize this information. First of all, which field are we trying to visualize? I want to shade in the countries based on the average runtime minutes. If I click on the drop-down list, I'm presented with a list of all the columns stored in the map database, but also right down at the bottom, all of the columns I've got from my country films dataset. Slightly annoyingly, I don't get options to choose the average runtime, so I'll pick the next best thing. I'll pick sum of runtime minutes and then adjust that a little later. I can then pick the colour rule, so green, yellow, red, not exactly my favourite. Let's go with something different. I'll go with the same one I showed you in the sample video. I'll go white to green. I can also choose to display labels on the countries. I can choose to display the country names, or I could display one of my aggregate fields if I wanted to, but I think that looks a little bit messy personally, so I'm not going to bother displaying labels. But again, all these options we can change later anyway. I'll at this point click the Finish button, and that's finally the end of the wizard. And if I just run the report at this stage, by going back to the Home tab and clicking Run, you will hopefully see that I do get a map displayed eventually, and it has indeed shaded in different countries of the world in different shades of green according to the sum of runtime minutes for films made in those countries. Okay, so there are plenty of things we could change here. I want to keep this simple though. I want to focus on the drill through settings. The first thing I want to do is just make sure I get my Bing Maps layer back, and to get that to work I need to go back to the design view And I need to click into the map to select it, and then I need to click again to select the map viewport. So at the top of the properties window it should say map viewport. Now you might remember the error message that popped up on the wizard talked about the coordinate system being set to planar, and that's why the Bing Maps layer couldn't be displayed. If I change planar to the only other available type, which is geographic, it will set the projection type to, I'm not sure of the pronunciation here, I'm sorry, Mercator, I'm not sure. But that's the option that's required for Bing Maps to work anyway. So you can hopefully see that the Bing Maps layer has appeared in the background. You can see the oceans of the world in the background. So that's how you get the Bing Maps layer back. You're not stuck with the Bing Maps layer, by the way. You can hide it by clicking on the eye symbol to temporarily hide it and bring it back. Or you can select it and then just click the cross to delete it entirely. There's no need to keep it if you don't really want it. The next thing I'd like to do is change the map from using the sum of runtime minutes to the average. To do that, I can modify the color rule of my polygon layer. So I can right click on this polygon layer and choose polygon color rule. I can then change the sum to the average just by typing into the data field box here. I've also got access to the full expression builder here, so if I click the FX button, I can use any of the other aggregate functions I didn't get the opportunity to pick during the wizard. So while I'm here, I'm just going to change sum to AVG and then click OK and OK again. And while I'm here, I'm just going to tidy up my map a little bit. I seem to have two keys showing essentially the same information. I only really need one of those, so let's get rid of the one in the bottom left-hand corner by selecting it and deleting it. I'll also get rid of the scale by selecting and deleting that. And I think I might move this key into the bottom left-hand corner so it doesn't overlay some of the countries in the top right. And then if I run the report again at that point, we should see now that New Zealand is a bit of a darker shade now. It's showing the average runtime rather than the total runtime. Next, I'd like to add a quick tooltip that tells me which country I'm about to click on when I hover the mouse cursor over it, just in case my geography isn't good enough to know. So back in the design view, I'm going to click into the map again so that I can see my polygon layer object in the map layers panel. I can then right click on that, and this time I'll choose polygon properties rather than polygon color rule. In there's a tooltip property, and I can click the FX button to launch the expression builder and then simply construct the tooltip I want to display. So I'll go to my fields list for the country films and double click the country field first, and then I can concatenate to that the new line character. There are several ways to do this. I believe the current recommendation is to say environment.newline and then another ampersand, and then I can refer to the average runtime minutes. But I'd like to make sure that this is formatted with 2 decimal places. So I'm going to use the format function, and then inside there refer to the average function, or AVG function I should say, and then I can double click on the runtime minutes field, and then I can close the round brackets for the average function, type in a comma, and in some double quotes type in 0.00 to format my number with 2 decimal places, close the double quotes and then close the round brackets, and that's my tooltip built. So if I click OK and OK again, I'm just going to resize my map a little bit as well to make it a little easier to see all of this. When I then run my report, I should see that hovering the mouse cursor over the different countries shows me the country name and the average runtime in minutes. Now let's do the thing that we're actually here to learn how to do. Make this map clickable so that clicking a country shows that country's films. To do that, if you've followed along with the previous parts of this series and done this with a table or a matrix or a chart, this will come as no surprise to you whatsoever. Back in the design view, I can click somewhere within the map to expose the chart data panel, the map layers panel, and then I can right click on my polygon layer object, choose polygon properties, and then from the action page on the left hand side, choose to go to a report. Click the browse button and look at my drill through reports folder. Choose my country target report. Click the add button to add a parameter. Choose the country ID parameter and pass into that Well, I'd like to pick the country ID, but again, I've been foiled by this foolish drop-down list. I can't select the country ID directly. So what I'm going to do is hit the FX button at the right-hand side of that drop-down list, head to the fields Country Films, and then double-click Country ID. I've no idea why that's not in the drop-down list. It would make an awful lot of sense for it to be so. Anyway, once I've clicked OK, I'll get Country ID written into that drop-down box. I can click OK again. And now I can run my report and I can give it a quick test. So let's go for New Zealand first. We know what that one should return. That should be Peter Jackson's very long films. There they all are. Then we can go back to the parent report. Let's go for Japan. Big fan of Japanese films, so there's quite a lot of those in there. Back again, and any other country you like, you can click on and see the films in the database that were made in that country. Now, there is a problem with the way this map is working at the moment. There are plenty of countries in the world that I haven't littered any films for in my database. But the problem is that those countries are still clickable in this map. They don't display a tooltip because there's no data to display for those countries. But if I clicked on one of those countries, it shows me films made in Sweden for some interesting reason. I believe the reason is it's linked to the idea that Sweden has the ID number with the maximum value of any countries in my database which have had films made in them. So I think Sweden is number 271, and there aren't any countries with an ID that's higher than that in my list. So for some reason, when I click on a country with no ID, it of course picks the highest ID out of my database and uses that instead. Anyway, I want to prevent that from happening. So what we're going to do is head back to the design view of the report. We're going to get the chart or the map layers panel back again, right click on the polygon layers object and choose polygon properties. And then on the action page, we're going to create an expression for the specify a report property. We're going to use an if function wrapped around what's in this dialog box at the moment. So let me just zoom in to make it a little easier to see. I'll take this existing text down a couple of lines and then type in a few spaces at the beginning of that line, and then wrap that up in a set of double quotes and close some round brackets at the end. That's going to be the end of the expression. The start of the expression is going to be an if function. So I'm going to type in equals IIF, then open some round brackets, and on the next line, type in a few spaces. And the condition I'm going to test for is if the value of any field in my country films dataset is nothing. So I can insert any field from here at all. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to go with the runtime minutes field. Let's double click on that. And then I can say if that is nothing, followed by a comma. On the next line, if that's true, I'm going to pass nothing to this property. Another comma, and as long as the runtime minutes is not nothing, it will refer to the report I'm trying to drill through into. So having done that, I can click OK a couple of times. And if I run the report again, we should see this time, if I hover the mouse over any country with no films made in it, at least in my database, I don't get the hyperlink mouse cursor, follow hyperlink cursor. I only get that when I hover over a country in which films have been made. Now, while there are plenty of formatting options we could change for our map, I think I'm going to save those for a later video that's dedicated to working with maps. I think we've covered all the things we need to cover to get the drill through system working. So at this point, all I would do is save this report to my report server, so I can hit the save button here. In the same drill through reports folder, I'll call this map of runtimes or something along those lines. I can save that, and then if I browse back to my web portal into my drill through reports folder, I'll just refresh that to bring up my two new reports. Eventually they will appear. I'll get around to answering these questions that have popped up shortly as well. So let's see, we've got our map of runtimes. I can click on that to open the report. My map will eventually appear. There she is. I can hover the mouse over different countries to see the information, see that I can't click on invalid countries. But if I clicked on, say, Italy, I get a list of films made in Italy. So we're right back to where we started with at the start of the video. clicking on different countries to see a list of the films made in that country. So there we are, that's how you create drill-through reports using maps in Report Builder. Hope you found that one useful and interesting. Thanks for watching, see you next time.